This is the Chappell Real Estate Show, Season 2, Episode 3. I know from my perspective of having been a seller recently in this market, you want to make sure that your house is going to, a good buyer, but you also have to look out for your own bottom line. At the end of the day, these are investments. This is money that's going into your pocket so that you can, purchase another property. Especially for a lot of these sellers in the market, they have to find a place to go. So every single dollar that they can make on the sale of their other property is going to help them in the future. So, there's a lot to think about on both sides of the transaction.
Welcome to the Chappell Real Estate Show, your source for the latest real estate information so you can buy, sell, and invest with the best in Texas. Whether you're a first-time buyer, a current homeowner, or a seasoned investor, you've come to the right place. We're here to simplify all things real estate so you can achieve your goals of property ownership with your hosts, Daniel and Roger Chappell.
What's up, listeners, and thank you guys for tuning into the Chappell Real Estate Show, your source for the latest real estate information so that you can learn how to buy, sell, and invest with the best in Texas. I'm your host, Daniel Chappell, here with my co-host today, Roger Chappell. How are you doing today, Dad?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you guys doing?
Oh, doing pretty well. Excited to bring today's information to us. So for those of you who listened to the most recent episode, we mentioned that we were going to put together a little bit of a first-time buyers, series. First-time buyer series. That's what we're putting together for you today. So we're going to do a few little recordings, kind of try to keep the information as minimal as possible. I know that for those of you who aren't experienced in real estate, some of the terminology that we're going to use, it can be a lot to digest. So we're going to kind of break it up into a few different episodes to minimize the amount of information you're getting at a time. And hopefully you'll be able to get some really good value out of it. But, to kick things off, Dad, it's been a little while since our listeners have heard from you. So why don't you, tell everybody what you've been up to and give us a little bit of a Chappell chunk for our listeners today.
Today's Chappell chunk is make sure that when you're working with your lender, you provide them all of the documentation you need right up front. Today's market is so exceptionally crazy that you want to make sure you have everything prepared when you find that right home and you submit the offer. You don't want any kind of hiccups or anything, and the best way to prevent that is to be on top of it in the beginning and make sure you do what you need to do with the lender and get all that documentation taken in or sent in a very timely manner. So that's today's Chappell chunk. Stay on top of your business and make sure you get your stuff in a timely manner. Now, as far as what I've been up to, my gosh, I have been so daggum busy lately, it's not even funny. So earlier, maybe later last year, at the end of last year, I signed up for a deal called the Closer Club. And the Closer Club is like a coaching thing that we did for 7 weeks. And with the Closer Club, there was so much work that was involved in that. One of the things I started doing was setting a number of appointments. So we were required to make 50 phone calls a week and then set 3 appointments. Well, me being who I am, decided, if I set 6 appointments a week, and I make those actual appointments, then I don't have time to make 50 phone calls. And that turned out to be so true. And along with that comes more business. So not only did I get more business, I also decided that I'm also going to shift my business from residential to commercial. So the rest of our team will be doing residential, whereas I'm going to be doing commercial. So with all of that comes a ton of training, which I've started again. It seems like I can't get away from training. That's one of the things that I do all the time is educate myself and make sure that I stay on top of things. So that's predominantly what I've been up to. And then, of course, travel. Your mom and I like to travel and go and do different things, and we've been doing quite a bit of that. In fact, I'm leaving tomorrow, headed down to Guatemala for a week. We've got a wedding to attend down there, so that's going to be a nice little break. So we've got just a lot going on. Focus on family, and the work just takes care of itself. I don't even worry about the work anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's great to hear. I know our listeners and our team and everybody appreciates how much you dedicate to, staying up with with current business and, constantly looking to grow yourself and grow your knowledge in the real estate business. But I know you're busy in your side business as well with Console Tech. So that's great to hear. Just filling up your time. I too have been spending a little bit of time, educating myself on a few different things. One, of course, our continuing education. I got my license renewal coming up in July. And then on top of that, I just got started. I spent a couple of years in college, very long time ago. It feels like 8-10 years ago now. But I finally decided to go back. I'm finishing up my business degree. So learning a lot about, leadership and, managing and leading in business. It's a lot of fun stuff. So, lots of learning and education going on in the Chappell family and the Chappell Realty Group right now. So it's good stuff. But yeah, so as you mentioned, we're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about, content for our buyers. Today's market is forever changing. There's constant changes happening. We're still seeing a lot of increases in property values in most of the Austin area. And it's taking a toll on a lot of buyers. So we want to, dedicate a little bit of time and make sure that our buyers understand what the process looks like, and give them some tips and tricks so that they can, be successful in achieving their ownership goals in real estate in the Austin market. So let's kind of kick things off and talk about knowing your finances. This is something we've released episodes on, getting your finances in order. We've brought lenders onto the show before to talk about some of the different nuances that go along with the lending process. But, we want to reiterate that and apply it to today's market. So Dad, let's kick things off talking about knowing your finances for our listeners.
Yeah, so in today's market, what we're learning and seeing over and over again is our first-time buyers are having an impossible time buying. And the reason being is, if they're relying on a government-backed loan such as USDA or FHA, it's extremely difficult to purchase in today's market. And the reason being is they just don't have the cash to get past the appraisals. I have seen a couple of VA loans get approved and actually get their offers accepted. So there is some of that. I appreciate the fact when a seller takes a look and sees that a veteran is trying to take advantage of their benefits and is able to actually move forward with that veteran. That's always a really good sign. But those are still very few and far between as well. So with that in mind, as a buyer, especially a first-time buyer, you really need to make sure that you pay attention to a couple of things. First of all, interest rates. Interest rates are very important, especially as it relates to our finances. The higher the interest rate goes, the less we can afford to purchase depending on what our finances are. It really does shrink that price point down. When it shrinks that price point down, when we see folks that, for example, are used to looking at homes from the 350 to 400 range, now they may be looking at the 325 to 350, 375 range maximum. Well, that actually shrinks your buying power. So, and what we're seeing in today's market, especially around the Austin area, is that home prices are continuing to rise at historical rates. It is truly dramatic, some of the things that we're seeing in today's market. So I don't want the buyers to be completely discouraged, but I want you to be prepared for what's coming and how frustrating you might feel going through this process. Just remember, your agent feels the exact same frustration, and our job as professionals is to try to keep that emotion out of it and just kind of guide you through the process and let you know that just stay patient, stay persistent, and it will happen. If you've got your finances in order and you've got your lender there, just be patient. It's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of it too is, setting realistic expectations. We're not doing anybody any services by, sugarcoating this process. Like, it is tough out there. It's tough in the market right now. It's tough to be a buyer. It can be tough to be a seller, being somebody who's, looking at all these offers. I know our listing agents are busier than ever trying to field all these different offers, looking at the different, we know as agents, there's a lot of different things that can make or break a deal. And there's a lot of little small blanks in those contracts that can really, sway in one direction or the other. And when you've got 50 offers on the table, it's pretty tough to sit there and really go in detail and compare these offers and make sure that, you're picking the right offer, and also trying to do a service for both sides of the deal. Because I think it's important too for, I know from my perspective of having been a seller recently in this market, you want to make sure that your house is going to, a good buyer, but you also have to look out for your own bottom line. At the end of the day, these are investments. This is money that's going into your pocket so that you can, purchase another property, especially for a lot of these sellers in the market. They have to find a place to go. So every single dollar that they can make on the sale of their other property is going to help them in the future. So, there's a lot to think about on both sides of the transaction, but, really, really important to know and understand your finances, where you stand, what it's going to take to get a deal done, which we'll talk about a little bit towards the end of this episode. But, knowing your finances, Dad, what's number one? What should our buyers be aware of, and what can they expect going into the process?
So knowing your finances simply means making sure that you have some money set aside for closing. And it doesn't matter to me which loan type that you go to, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. You still need to make sure that you have some money set aside. Typically, you can look at about 3, maybe 3.5% of whatever the purchase price is to be the buyer's final closing cost. Used to be, we would say somewhere between 2.75 to 3% would be a typical buyer's closing cost. That's no longer the case, especially in today's market where the buyer is paying a lot more in closing costs than what they would have previously. They're picking up a lot of what typically would be a seller's closing costs. So you need to make sure that you have some cash set aside for that. Now, mind you, closing costs are not your down payment. Those are two completely separate things. So that 3% that I'm talking about, 3.5%, that is a fee that you're going to pay no matter what. So just be prepared for that. In addition, you have your down payment. And we'll get into that in just a minute on the type of mortgage that one chooses. So one thing to qualify for a loan, it depends on your credit score. So if you've got some hiccups in your credit, get those squared away first. Before you ever even apply for a loan, you need to get those things taken care of. And some lenders may want you to go ahead and apply so they can see where they can actually help you along the way. So make sure that's done. Once you do that, you cannot open up any other large lines of credit. Any lines of credit, period. That means credit cards. That means putting things on layaway at Walmart or Target or whatever. That means buying a car. You can't buy a car, or even paying off some of your loans. Sometimes that can actually hurt your credit score versus help it. You don't want to close any credit accounts that you already have opened. Leave those things open. Closing those accounts could negatively impact your credit score. So you want to put yourself in the best buying position possible. Your credit score and your credit rating is the first place to do that. Secondly, you need to make sure that you don't make any large deposits or large withdrawals from your regular bank account. The reason being is that could trip up something somewhere along underwriting, and then they start digging, and before you know it, you may have to bring in other accounts or other people who furnished you those accounts, and they may not be willing to share that information. And I actually had that happen once before, which is why I mentioned it. So you just have to be careful about doing those sorts of things. Finally, you need to make sure that your income supports paying a mortgage. And typically your income you can afford a mortgage payment of about twice to 2.5 times whatever your income is. That's basically what it is. I don't want to get into the finance ratios and all of that. I feel at this stage, that's better left off to a lender to explain to you versus us. We do understand that process, but I think at this point, you just need to make sure that you don't make these mistakes, because these are common mistakes that will prevent you from qualifying for a loan in the future. And in today's market, you just can't do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you too, we've got a lot of episodes out, even the one that I just recently released, season 2, episode 2, I go in a little bit more detail as far as what some of those debt to income ratios are for the different loan programs, what the down payment amounts are. We dive into some of that stuff, but again, it's all very generalized, and it might not apply to your specific situation. So you always want to make sure that you talk with your lender about all of the specifics when it comes to any deal that you're going to pursue, because we know that the process starts when you go for the pre-approval, when you start searching for homes, but that process can last a month, it can last 6 months, it could last a year or 2 even. It's a long process, especially in today's market, depending on your financial situation. So definitely make sure that you partner yourself with a good lender. If you don't know one, reach out to us, we'll definitely get you connected. But it's really important. I know when I was under contract on the house that I'm in right now, I literally called my lender for everything. From the moment I got pre-approved in the process, I mean, we put offers in on probably 5 or 6 houses. Every offer that we put in, I was calling my lender. Hey, how do the numbers look? How's the HOA fees look? How do the taxes look? Am I going to be able to afford the monthly payment for this particular property? Because tax rates change. It's not going to be the same for a house that's in Leander versus a house that might be in Georgetown or Cedar Park or where else. These tax rates vary. So that's going to affect what your mortgage payment is. The HOA fees vary depending on the neighborhood. So that could play into your ability to qualify. But you even talked about this too when it comes to, closing accounts, paying bills, that kind of stuff. I was literally calling my lender, hey, I was going to pay off, this credit card, or I have, a credit card bill that's due that's in the amount of $600. Can I pay that right now, or do I need to wait? Do I need to pay the minimum balance? What do I need to do so that it doesn't impact, the back end of this deal? And it's really important. I mean, there were certain accounts, for example, our debt to income ratio when we purchased this house didn't support our second car payment. So as part of the closing process for the purchase of the home, instead of me paying off the car before closing, my lender paid the car off at the closing table. So it's all lumped into the transaction process. So, always make sure you talk to your lender, because they may have solutions to offer you that you hadn't even thought of or that you didn't even know they were capable of. So always make sure you talk to your lender when it comes to your financial situation. Cannot stress that enough.
Absolutely. So the second tip, and mind you, we're going to give you 5 tips today. That's the importance of this. We're giving you 5 tips. We just went over one of them, and that one was actually a lot lengthier than what we anticipated, but that's a very important tip. Know your finances. The second one is choose your mortgage type. So Daniel, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I just released an episode a couple of weeks back that kind of dove into some of the different loan types there are. But as we've already mentioned in the episode so far, there's FHA loans, there's VA loans, there's USDA loans, there's conventional loans, and all these different loan types have different qualifications. Sometimes you have to have, a certain debt to income ratio. Usually FHA, USDA, and VA have a little bit more flexibility than conventional loans on your front and your back end ratio. So front end ratio is the amount of debt that you have relative to your income before you factor in your new mortgage payment, and then your back end ratio would be all of your debt plus your mortgage payment. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but you have to sit down with your lender, discuss your financial situation. So this is what the pre-approval process looks like, or the pre-qualification process. So pre-qualification is one step before pre-approval. Pre-qualification basically means that you're sitting down with your lender and you're informing them of, this is how much income I have, this is the debt that I have, so-and-so, if it's car payments or credit cards or whatever it may be. A pre-approval is going to be one step further. That means that the lender has taken that information that you've provided them and they've verified that it's accurate. Because, on occasion you might forget that you had a car payment, or you might forget to mention a credit card that you, had in collections, or, there's a lot of different things that may have slipped your mind when you were going through the pre-qualification process with your lender. So those are step 1 and 2 is pre-qualification and pre-approval. And when you go through those steps with your lender, it's important that you're upfront and honest about what your situation is, because that's what's going to allow the lender to recommend the best loan program for you based on the amount of savings that you have, based on the income that you have, what your debt to income ratio is, and these types of things. So picking your mortgage type, big decision, but it's not one that you can take lightly, and it's not one that you can do without assistance. You always want to make sure you have a professional to kind of guide you through that process.
All very true.
Choosing the mortgage type is like I said, you want to make sure you partner with a lender to get that taken care of. Kind of moving into the next thing is picking your location, right? So tip 1 is knowing your finances. Number 2 is choose your mortgage type. Number 3 is obviously location. You have to know where you want to live. So, Dad, kind of explain to our listeners how they can go through the process of determining what might be a good place for them to live.
So that's a really good question, and this is a nice little segue too. So I've noticed in today's market, one of the things that we're seeing, especially with first-time buyers, is they want to look in a specific area. They have a maximum price point, and what we're seeing is that these price points continue to climb. It doesn't matter what price tag the seller puts on their home for sale. If it's priced right, it's probably going to go under multiple offers and go for much higher than what they ever anticipated. I know I have been shocked over and over again with some of the listings that I've put out. It's mind-boggling. I mean, we think we know how much a house will sell for, all the training and education and whatnot that we go through to try to figure that out, only to find out that the buyers are spending way more than what we ever imagined. So we're looking at different locations now. So what does that mean? So one of the things that I suggest to buyers all the time is when you're looking for a location, one thing to keep in mind are the schools, the grocery store, your religious institution that you like to go to or not, parks. What is your lifestyle? So a lot of people around Austin love to be near the river, the Colorado River, which is also Lake Travis and Lake Austin and God knows how many other different lake names through the river. So people like that outdoor life. They also like to be able to walk and hike and bike and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of outdoor activities. That is very important to a number of folks. So if that's one of the things that's important to you, you need to look in those areas. Number two, one of the real great things, and we learned this, my wife and I, when we were in San Diego, when my wife was looking for a home and a place to live, she started going to the grocery stores and paying attention to the grocery store. Who is going into that grocery store? Because remember, those are your neighbors. The people that shop there could be your neighbors. So you want to make sure that you feel comfortable going to that shopping center. How far is it from the church? Is it a 10-minute drive, or are you going to have to make a 45-minute drive? It depends on what you want and what you prefer. When it comes to, say, medical, if you've got medical conditions or maybe physical therapy or eye doctors or things of that nature, you want to make sure you're close to all of those things. So those are things to take into consideration. And typically what I tell the buyers in today's market, by the time you start working with me and not just making contact with me, but when we're ready to actually go and start looking, all of this homework should be done. So this is what I call shopping. I do not go shopping with the buyers. The buyers need to go do that on their own. Hopefully by the time we get ready to go, we're actually going and we're not just looking at houses, we're actually looking to purchase a home. So when we go into that home, I frequently say this, and I'd say it more of a joke and jest, but I tell them, bring your checkbook, because today we're not just going to go look at a home, we're going to go buy a home. And I tell this to the team all the time as well. We do not show homes, we sell them. And the reason we sell homes is because we prepare our buyers well ahead of time to make sure when it's time to actually go, that the buyer is prepared to actually make an offer and purchase that home. So that means that they've already done a lot of the legwork. Now, that's kind of taking it away from the way agents used to do work. Used to, we'd get them in a car and drive them around and show them all these different areas. That's not the case hardly anymore. We do that on occasion for our out-of-state buyers, but if they're just driving in from somewhere local, to me, they need to do all that on their own. If they're coming in from out of state and they're not familiar with this area, that's a different scenario altogether. But most of the buyers that we're working with, they're actually here locally. They've been living here for a period of time. They have an idea of where they want to be. So that part of it is done. They know they want to be in this school district. They know they want to, like I had one buyer that wanted to be in a particular school. He could care less about the house itself, but he wanted to be in this particular school and he had a price point. So I was able to find him a home actually very quickly for he and his family. He really didn't care about the house. So, I mean, it just depends. Every buyer is really different. So make sure that you focus on that. And one of the other things, too, about location that's important is with today's market, we're starting to see the price points jump in ways we never anticipated. So now we're starting to look in areas outside of where we initially were looking. So if being close to work is an important factor, but then the price point is preventing that, then you have to start taking a look at geography. If I can get out maybe 30, 40 minutes away from where my place of business is and better afford a property, then that's probably what I need to be doing. So I tell that to the buyers as well. If you're comfortable with driving 30, 45 minutes to and from work a day, then we need to start looking that far out. So what that does is it increases the radius that we're looking, but it also increases the chances of them being able to buy in today's market. So it's just one of those things to keep in mind. And when we get into some of these outlying areas, we may actually have to join a different MLS to find all the properties that are available like that. So those are things to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So Daniel, do you have any other questions or anything, any comments about location?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much touched on everything that I would usually recommend to my clients is that they, look into the schools and the surrounding area, at types of entertainment, whatever it is that suits your lifestyle. You should know more or less what you want to be around. And the better job you do of identifying those things, the better job that we're going to be able to do as your agents to recommend areas within that price range, within that geographic region, or outside of it. It makes a big difference. As you mentioned, if somebody comes with you with a really, really specific criteria, it makes it really easy for us to find a home that meets those criteria or not and be able to advise them accordingly. So, super, super important. I think you hit all the major points there on the head. Perfect. So from there, we'll kind of dive into considering the total cost, right? So as you kind of alluded to already earlier in the episode, there's a couple of different costs associated with the purchase of a home. One of them is going to be, of course, your closing costs, and that's going to incorporate your portion of the year's taxes. Nowadays, it's including title fees and appraisal fees and different things of that nature. What are some of the other costs that are associated with the closing cost, Dad?
HOA fees and their portion of the insurance. So different lenders require different things, but typically what a buyer is going to see is they're going to have to pay whatever the origination fee is to get the loan started to begin with. And usually that's 1% to 2% of whatever the cost of the home is. Then you take a look at their portion, the buyer's portion of the property taxes. So property taxes get paid at the end of the year. So because of that, a seller will credit a buyer for their portion of those taxes. So let's say we close June 30th. That's 6 months through the year. The seller is responsible for 6 months. The buyer is responsible for 6 months. So the buyer will receive a credit at closing for that 6 months that the seller actually owned the property. But the entire full year tax bill will be due at the end of the year. Lenders are also going to require at least 3 months of insurance, homeowners insurance, paid up front. Additionally, HOA fees. There may be some HOA fees that would be required in escrow. Not normally in escrow, but it could happen. So keep that in mind. HOA fees typically are paid outside of escrow, but they are also important because in Texas, if there's an HOA involved, you must pay your HOA fees. If you don't, it's in a mandatory HOA. If you don't, then they can actually file a lien against your property, and it gets really, really ugly. So those actually get calculated in as far as total costs. Let's see, what else?
Well, I mean, very importantly is, of course, your down payment, right? That's the other big portion of your total cost to purchase the home. And again, that varies dependent on your loan type, usually anywhere between 3.5% on the low end. Some loan types offer 0%, but on the high end, you're looking at 10, 20% if it's not your first, if it's not your primary residence. So if you're looking at a secondary home, maybe a vacation home or something to that effect, or an investment property, you're going to be in the 10 to 20% down payment range. So it plays a big factor in your total expense as far as, what does it cost you to purchase the home at the closing table?
That's correct. And then finally, I think this is very important, and I did allude to this earlier about knowing your finances, but the fifth one is don't buy anything until you close. Now, we're not talking about don't buy a house until you close. Obviously, you don't actually buy the house until it closes. However, once you decide that you're going to purchase a home, and I mean before you ever even submit an offer, once you've decided that you're going to buy a home, then that's when you don't want to buy anything large, any large expenses, open up any other credit accounts. I mentioned that already before. That's how extremely important it is. We're wrapping this segment up with saying, don't open any credit accounts. Don't make any large purchases. Don't make any large withdrawals. Don't even make any large deposits if you can avoid it, unless you can give a really good rational explanation for it. So, like sometimes you may sell a car, or you got an extra bonus or something from work, or you've got an extra employment gig that you're working. So all of those things are legitimate reasons. So you can make those deposits. Just be prepared to explain them. Just don't make any large purchases. It could possibly disqualify you from purchasing a home. And trust me, that's the last bad news you want when you're under contract for a home.
Yeah, and to put it differently, no irregular expenses, because we know that you can't just stop spending money, right? You have to buy gas to get to and from work. You got to get your groceries because you got to eat. If you typically would go out to eat 2 or 3 times a week, it's okay for you to continue that. Don't go to, the best steakhouse and spend $1,000 on a meal, but no irregular expenses. Just continue your normal routine. Like my dad said, don't open any new credit accounts or anything like that. Don't close any old credit accounts. No big purchases. Just continue your regular spending until you get past that closing table. And not just past the closing table, but until you have funded. Because it takes, a little bit of time. Usually there's always 2 parties to a transaction. They both have to sign. They both have to finalize their documentation. And it takes a little bit of time, sometimes an hour or 2, sometimes a day or 2. For these deals to actually fund. So no, don't do anything until you've received notification from your lender that your deal has funded, you have the keys to your new home, and you're good to go. So I cannot stress that enough. We've both been parts of transactions where these kinds of things come up, and you just have to know and understand, do not do it. I actually did it when I purchased my first home. I don't know if you remember this, Dad, but I bought my first car in July, and then my house got under contract in August, and I, by some miracle, was still able to qualify. But man, I've personally made that mistake. I've worked with clients who have made that mistake. So don't be like me. All right.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much wraps up all of our 5 tips for our buyers today. So, Dad, would you mind just wrapping them up real quick? Hit 1 through 5, and then we'll wrap up the episode for our listeners today.
Yeah. So let's go through these 5 one more time. Number 1, know your finances. We discussed that in depth. Number 2, choose your mortgage type. Talking with your lender, they'll be able to walk you through that process. Number 3, choose the location and be wise about how you choose that. Number 4, consider the total cost. That includes the HOA fees, your insurance, all that kind of stuff goes in there, your closing costs, and your down payment. And then finally, don't buy any major purchases until you actually close. And I know it's very tempting. They've got no interest financing for the first 48 months, et cetera, et cetera. Don't fall for that, because as soon as you do, you just opened up a new account. So don't do that. Even though the payments are deferred, I'm telling you, don't do it, because you just may have screwed things up. So that's the 5 tips right there.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that last point one more time, do not make any big purchases. Like my dad said, it's tempting. When you're buying a new house, you want to get the new furniture, and you want to get the new bed and the new electronics, the new TV, and this, that, or the other that you're going to put in the living room. Don't do it yet. I promise you, all Best Buy, Mattress Firm, Rooms to Go, every one of those big retailers is going to offer you the same promotional financing year round. So I promise you, it will still be available after closing. Make sure you hold off, wait until you have the keys to your new home in hand, and then go crazy. Do whatever you want within reason. Of course, you don't want to spend more money than you can afford, but can't emphasize that enough. But I think that pretty much wraps it up for our episode today. I'm going to hand it over to my dad for his closing thoughts, because we haven't heard them in quite some time. So Dad, wrap it up for our listeners today, please.
So I want to end this episode the way I've ended almost every one of them we did last year, and that is referrals, referrals, referrals. So I say this all the time, and I mean it. If you need something from somebody, reach out to us and let us know. We can refer you somebody, and I don't care what it is. If it's a mechanic, if it's a painter, if it's an electrician, if it's a roofer, if it's you need a driver for whatever, or you've got employment opportunities and you need folks for those kinds of things. I don't care what it is. Reach out to us. We have a tremendous network. We're able to help you out. If you're looking to buy or sell in another state, by all means, please reach out to us. We have a referral network where we can reach out to some great folks for you. So if you appreciate what we do for you, we have like-minded individuals that we network with on a regular, continuous basis. So we've got the network. just reach out to us and let us know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys again. I say it at the end of just about every episode too. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to us and for sharing these episodes with your friends and anybody that you know who may benefit from the content that we provide. So thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. This is the Chappell Realty Group signing off. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Chappell Real Estate Show. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. Find us on social media at Chappell Realty Group and online at chappellrealtygroup.com. Until next time.